Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to IP Consulting's webinar. It's Cybersecurity Insurance Decoded. So where we're going to be talking about what drives the rates, where people stand, and how to reduce premiums. I'm Kimberly Glowacki, and I'm the Director of Strategic Growth for IP Consulting, and I'm going to be your host today. So today's session is going to run about 45 minutes. We're going to leave some time at the end for Q&A, so please feel free to drop any questions that you might have into the chat at any point. We'll do our best to answer all the questions that we can. This session will be recorded and made available to all of you, along with a gift from Sinclair. She's going to tell us a little bit more about it. Sinclair's our guest, joining me through our partnership with Seedpod Cyber to help us demystify the cybersecurity insurances. Welcome, Sinclair.
Hey, Kim. Yeah, thanks so much for having me today.
Absolutely. I've had a chance to work with you. So I know the passion that you have around this topic. So I'm excited to have a chance to dive into it. Let's get right into it and share a little bit to start with about Seedpod Cyber.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Seedpod Cyber was really built to help small and medium-sized businesses access comprehensive cyber insurance that's actually designed to respond when it matters. So what really makes us different is we partner directly with security-focused MSPs, so like IP Consulting. And since you guys are the ones actually implementing the controls that a lot of carriers are now looking for, and can validate security items being in place, it just makes sense. So, because certain security protections are in place and are being actively managed by a vetted MSP, which I mean, IP Consulting, as you know, Kim, went through a pretty extensive assessment of your own security environment to make this program available to your clients. So our insurance markets view, your clients and our partners' clients as inherently being lower risk, which allows us to unlock exclusive programs, often with broader coverage and usually some pretty significant premium savings. Around 30% is what we typically see. But like as a one-liner, I'd say really Seedpod Cyber's goal through our work with MSPs is to really bring insurance and security together. That way businesses aren't just like buying a policy, they're really positioned for better coverage, better pricing, and real protection.
Thank you. I really appreciate that high level explanation. And I know that yesterday we were working together with one of our clients, and one of the things I thought was amazing is you really kind of bring the information to what is it and what makes it different. So I know we'll get into a little bit more of that today, but let's go get the lay of the land. So, people hear cyber insurance, and I think they often assume that it's probably some part of their already existing business policy. What is cybersecurity insurance, and what does it actually cover?
Yeah, it's a great question because it is a very common misconception, I think. So, most traditional general liability or property, like commercial policies, will actually exclude cyber losses. And so something we see a lot of, especially working with, our partners' clients, is they'll think they have comprehensive cyber insurance, but it's usually some sort of bolted on like a rider or endorsement um, onto their general liability or business owner's policy. And so the problem with those that we often find, one, those types of riders or endorsements don't really offer comprehensive coverage. They typically only offer cyber liability, so damages to others, not your actual expenses with, responding to and recovering from an incident. And then another issue we see with those riders and endorsements is that they're usually pretty low in coverage. So usually you'll see those for like $50,000 to $100,000, which certainly is not going to cover the actual financial exposure of, going through an incident and getting out on the other side. Um, when I think of like a comprehensive standalone policy, I guess some of the like key things I would be looking for that, the policies we issue at Seedpod all have are things like, your loss of revenue because you're down during an incident. Having forensics come out, which, anytime you file a claim, that is going to happen and can get very costly. Restoring your systems and recovering any data as needed. Those can also be pretty costly, direct cost to the business. as well as notifying clients or impacted parties, which, especially in regulated industries, can get pretty pricey. And then just your general crime coverage, which is becoming extremely important, that a comprehensive standalone policy would offer. So to cover things like social engineering or wire transfer fraud, stuff like that.
And I know we've been hearing a lot more about that social engineering. And I know that I told you I was going to ask you a little bit about AI. So I'll poke into that a little bit later. But I think the key message that I'm hearing from you is the cybersecurity insurance is not as redundant. People might think it's not the same as their traditional business. I'm sorry. It's not the same as their traditional business liability coverage. It's in addition to, and it's really, I think, the payout for getting the business back up and running.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, typically, you're not looking at redundancy with your cyber insurance policy. It's literally filling the gaps that your other commercial lines of coverage were never actually designed to cover.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. And I know that we've worked with clients that didn't even know that they needed that separate policy. So if we maybe have some of those folks who are here in our audience today, what would you want to make sure that they understand about that cybersecurity insurance?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there is definitely a lot, and, I'm sure we'll get into a lot of it today. I mean, the most important thing that I think from my conversations has been that business owners, and C-suite leaders don't always realize that their cyber insurance is very closely tied to their security environment, both in the premium that they pay as well as claims outcomes. So, like, for example, one of the biggest issues that we're seeing in the cyber insurance market right now is that there's a very high claim denial rate. Like 44% of cyber insurance claims are actually denied, because there was disconnect, right, between what was actually, deployed in their security environment versus what the carrier was requiring. So yeah, having a policy isn't always enough. You actually need to make sure that you're compliant with what the carrier is expecting.
Yeah, this came as a surprise to me when the 44% was shocking of denials and even paying your premiums, and that some would have that insurance or what they thought was that peace of mind and still get denied because of those gaps in the security posture. I'm guessing, Sinclair, that we're going to see a lot more financial leaders teaming up with those technology leaders to reduce the cyber risk because they're all about risk, risk aversion.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the industry landscape. I don't think cybersecurity attacks are going anywhere anytime soon. I think the incident rates that we're seeing, they're getting more clever, but I want to know, what changes are you seeing?
Yeah, yeah, the marketplace, of course, is definitely changing. And as it pertains to cyber insurance, I feel like, it has definitely evolved. It used to be kind of this optional line of coverage, and most people kind of assumed it was for enterprises, large organizations. And it really has transformed into being like an essential piece of really any business's risk management strategy. I mean, we all know it. We rely on technology a lot to do our work day to day. Every business does. And especially in today's modern era of doing business, we're also relying heavily on third party vendors. And so, with that, we've definitely seen a shift in businesses, of all sizes are being required now contractually, to have cyber insurance just to be able to do business. As far as like underwriting requirements, I do think we've seen a bit of a change there as well. It has become more technical. So insurers are now, not only asking questions about what you have deployed in your security environment, but, going as far as requiring proof of certain controls like multi-factor authentication, backups, endpoint security, patching, all those basic security deployments. Uh, like post COVID, premiums definitely spiked. The market hardened, excuse me. It was really expensive, to get a cyber policy. But since then, over the past couple of years, I've definitely seen that stabilize. And I think that that's due in part to carriers now looking for a certain level of security for insureds to even offer a policy. But certainly, costs for businesses that can demonstrate that they have strong security, they're meeting the requirements, that the carrier requests, definitely see that reflected in their premiums. It's fairly affordable for those businesses.
So I'm hearing that now's a good time, especially if they've worked on their security protocols, for them to revisit what they're paying in premiums. And I heard you mention in their proof, is it difficult for those small and medium businesses to prove that, it used to be just an easy attestation? Is it easy for them or difficult for them to provide that proof?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely can be. I know, Kim, you're aware that, not all tools are created equally and, not all tools are deployed equally either. So we definitely find a higher level of success with clients who are partnering with an MSP like IP Consulting to really assist with that application process and validation process.
Yeah, and I thank you for that. I do remember going through that rigorous process of vetting everything out, our tools, our processes to make sure that we're meeting that standard, not only for ourselves but for our clients. And
I know, I'm sorry. I wish we could make it easier, but I know you have seen firsthand, we're able to offer your clients a very streamlined application process, and it's that upfront assessment that we went through that really allows us to provide that.
we'll get into that a little bit later. So I've got some questions around that, and I actually took some notes for things beforehand that we've done with other clients. But no worries. I'm glad you guys are putting all that effort into holding managed service providers accountable, for delivering the appropriate security controls. I know price is a big concern for a lot of people, that are on this webinar today. Can you share some of those key factors that determine the price of that cybersecurity insurance policy premium?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and no surprise, right? Pricing is always top of mind for everyone when it comes to insurance. And cyber insurance is like other lines in that definitely pricing is driven by a lot of different factors. Some that the business, can control, and others that, just are beyond their control. I would say like some of the larger things that drive price, the first thing is definitely going to be security maturity, and being able, like we talked about, to prove certain controls being in place. Also, past claims history. So I definitely see that being a driver. And then overall, just business demographics, right? What is your revenue? What is your industry risk level? Weak security controls are definitely a primary driver of premiums going up, or just in general making coverage harder to obtain. But still affordable. I think if you're working with a vetted MSP and you've got the right security in place, as Seedpod does all the time, we're able to get some pretty significant savings in the market, like around 30% usually.
I'm glad you mentioned the cost savings again, because I told you before this webinar, I looked up to see what it was the last customer that we worked on together. And the cost savings was actually a 36% reduction in their premium and a higher level of coverage.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's what we like to hear. It's our goal.
Okay, so now I want to pivot a little bit. Now that we understand premiums, kind of how they're priced, do you have any practical tips for companies that they can take today on how they can reduce their premiums?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some baseline controls that, honestly, it's hard to find any reputable carriers that will issue a policy without. MFA
I
is one
see
of
that.
them. So multi-factor authentication. Don't know if you'll get necessarily a price cut or a premium reduction, but multi-factor authentication is at this point pretty much a baseline requirement to even get insured. Some other like more hardening security features, verified backups is definitely a big one, especially as we see ransomware as one of the most severe, types of incidents. So good to have backups that you can, you've tested restoration from, you can access them. Endpoint detection and response is another one, very important in mitigating a ransomware incident. Patch management, making sure things are being updated regularly, automated, hopefully. And then another one that I actually see missing a lot more than I'd like to is security awareness training. And I know now carriers are definitely looking at that and offering, some sort of premium, at least our markets are premium savings there. It really boils down to the businesses that win here are the ones who treat cybersecurity as like operational hygiene more than an emergency response or, something that they're checking the boxes off once a year.
Yeah, I agree. I know that implementing these can be like a really big lift because I'm looking at this list and I'm thinking, boy, we had a lot of gnashing of teeth and, fights and cuss and discuss over what is the best product for us to put in our stack and how do we want to control these things to make sure that we're checking the box in the highest security manner possible. So I know that, this is where kind of I think partnering with a managed service provider, hopefully like IP consulting, makes things a little bit more realistic and at least get you there faster.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why, I mean, I really enjoy working with MSPs like you, and the IP consulting team, because that vetting we talked about earlier, and our collaboration really, one, it makes sure that standards are being met. So, these businesses are adequately protected, but also that we can get them the best rates on the right coverage for their business.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And we are here to help in any way that we can. I feel like I'm bouncing around a little bit. I want to shift gears here and I want to talk about, the future. So maybe not too distant, but every time I go to a conference or sit in on training, I'm always hearing AI, AI, AI. And I'm curious how you see artificial intelligence changing the threat landscape specific to cybersecurity insurance in the next few years.
Yeah. I have definitely noticed the same. Everyone wants to talk about AI. And we've already seen it will and it has already, made attacks faster, harder to detect. And especially with, phishing and social engineering threats, we've seen those become far more sophisticated. Um, and with that, we're seeing ransomware has long been, I mean, I feel like almost anyone maybe has heard of ransomware at this point. It's one of the most common and most severe incidents, but now we're starting to see business email compromise kind of creep up there. And I think that's really being driven by AI. It's cheap for criminals, it's highly effective, and AI makes it really easy for them to trick us. I will say on the positive side of that, because I know a lot of people are, concerned about AI. Insurers are using AI as our MSPs, to improve detection and response. So even though that risk is certainly increasing, I think resilience is still very achievable, with like layered defenses and obviously insurance as a back. But yeah, AI is definitely changing things.
Yeah, and I think the transition goes back to something you were mentioning earlier is that shift from cybersecurity insurance and having all of those security protocols in place, going from optional to necessity, as the world gets faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is not a faraway future. We're seeing it already.
The future is always closer than we think it's going to be.
Yep.
Sinclair, we talked about the premium pricing and um I wanted to talk about the cost of not investing. So, in today's dollars, what's the average cost of a cyber attack? I know you were talking a little bit earlier, and I want to kind of keep it focused on small and medium businesses, but you were talking a little bit earlier about folks that have these policies that are 50 and $60,000.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good question. So what for 2025, and it is hard to kind of drill into these stats sometimes, but
Yeah.
because SMB is referred to very differently. What's the range of revenue we're looking for here, right? But I'd say for businesses with, say 2 million in annual revenue, for a typical data breach in 2025, we saw losses around 250 to 600,000. And so it's a pretty big number, especially for a small business, which I think really highlights just how dangerous a misconception it is. And we see it all the time with smaller businesses that, they're too small to be targeted and, they're not really housing any sensitive data that anyone cares about. So it's not going to happen to them. And in reality, it's quite the opposite. What we find is threat actors are actively targeting small businesses because they often have fewer security controls. And for that reason, they represent easier entry, which, that's what cyber threat actors want. They want easy in, easy out. So it's really a shame to see that false sense of security, it leads small to medium-sized businesses not only to underinvest in their security, but in a lot of cases, they just forego cyber insurance altogether. And when an incident does happen, $600,000, that could be very financial impact there is devastating at that point.
Yeah, I agree that the number alone is sobering. When you and I were preparing for this interview and we were chatting about it, and I guess I didn't think about, that that's enough for some smaller businesses to say, I just can't afford to accept that loss. Right. So that's to me, that's scary because I love small and medium businesses. But I mean, you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but what are the most common incidents that you see driving these kinds of claims?
Yeah. So definitely I did touch on it, ransomware. That still tends to be, like I said, the most frequent and the most severe type of incident we'll see. So that's where like a threat actor gets access to your network and pretty much locks you out of your data. And either, demands an extortion, tries to extort you to get an encryption key so you can get, access to your data. Um, or in a lot of cases now, we're starting to see that they'll just exfiltrate data. And so it's more silent. You don't really know what's happening until all of your data has been exfiltrated, which is scary. Um, Coming up on that is now trending, I believe, business email compromise from what I've seen. I also, business email compromise typically leads to, a crime coverage trigger. So things like invoice manipulation, we're seeing a lot of that in the market right now, where someone gets access to your emails. Now they're intercepting legitimate invoices that you've sent out, and your clients or vendors are paying their account. And then of course other types of cybercrime with a business email compromise incident. Phishing, so social engineering, like we talked about. I think with AI, it's just gotten a lot easier to take advantage of human error. And then good old data breaches.
It's funny, you're saying these and like all these things are going through my head. I talked with a prospective client and they said, yeah, we know we're not quite doing the right thing because we're keeping our passwords on a spreadsheet and we're sharing the spreadsheet. And like the hair in the back of my neck starts to stand up. So I know that we've seen some of these and, quite frankly, like we've seen some phishing attempts, some pretty solid looking phishing attempts that looks like an email that came from Microsoft. And it's the reason why I'm probably one of the first ones to complete my security awareness training every month because I want to make sure that I'm staying vigilant. I don't want to be the one that caused any issues for our organization. So, um, so this is probably my next question here is probably an over asked question, but you know, clearly the real world impact stretches beyond that technical disruption. So my systems just aren't available. So for organizations that have to file a claim, what kind of business level impacts are you seeing for some of our business leaders that are on the call today?
Yeah, Kim, it might be over asked, but it definitely can't be overstated. Especially for small to medium-sized businesses, like the impact of downtime, legal exposure, reputational harm, client churn. I mean, it can be brutal and if not fatal. So, cyber events are definitely not just an IT problem, it's a business continuity event, really. And that's why it's, important to understand that cyber insurance, yes, of course, we're looking at limits of coverage. You want to make sure that, you have enough coverage to get you through to the other side. But a lot of things people don't realize, and we review our partners' clients' policies, so we look at a lot of different policy language. There's other things that really play into the quality of your coverage. Policy definitions and the structure of your limits and sublimits play a huge role in like determining how that coverage is actually going to be triggered and how an incident is handled in real life. So like even the smallest wording, I think can, significantly impact how a claim responds. And then just as important as the coverage and the language of the policy is definitely the carrier's incident response ecosystem. So a strong cyber policy will give the business access to specialized professionals. Forensics investigators, breach attorneys, regulatory guidance for notifying impacted parties, even PR support. So these are things that you're buying into, is that reputation and that incident response ecosystem that your business is going to have direct access to the right teams, to contain the incident, navigate the legal and compliance requirements that come with an incident, and then obviously just support recovery.
I, I couldn't agree with you more. And when you're in that moment of an incident, you really want to be able to call in the cavalry,
Yeah.
right? But you need to know who they are. You need to know what they're going to be doing and where to point them. And I think you also need to know, oh my goodness, these are very specialized teams. How am I going to compensate them? So yeah, I think that's a really big deal. But I want to camp on something else that you kind of said there. These are not IT problems, right? These are business level problems. And we find that more and more of our security conversations expanding beyond those technical leaders. So we're starting to see people get included, like the owner, the president, the financial leaders, because they're really managing that overall business risk. And it's been a pretty significant shift in that security conversation. So we touched on denials a little bit earlier, and I wanted to see those folks who are really managing risk at that leadership level. They're probably going to want to know, what are some of the things that can you shed light on why you see claims getting rejected?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I alluded to this earlier with the 44% of claims being denied because required controls weren't actually in place. So things like MFA or backups or your endpoint detection and response, um, you know, those you want to make sure you're making accurate attestations on your applications. Also, delayed reporting is another reason I'll see some claims denied. So just having logs and documentation that weren't readily available. Um, Definitely most denials are preventable, right? When your security and your insurance strategy are aligned, that there's no reason that you should have a claim denial. But I think this is really where an MSP can be a really big help because a security focused MSP ensures, from the get go, you've got the validated stack that insurers are looking for. And they provide a really important point of contact during that incident response. So there's no delay during an event. Insurers know that lowers risk, which results in better coverage and pricing, and is also why through our partnership programs, our preferred carriers let us list the trusted MSP for that, recovery and remediation because it just makes sense.
It's funny. I don't want to gloss over what you just said there because I think that's a really big benefit. When you're looking for that cavalry that we were just talking about, you really want to make sure that your managed service partner is part of that team because they already know who's who within your organization, standard escalation processes, who do you go to for this, and they know the policies, the processes, and the procedures across your organization.
Yep. Absolutely. And of course, we always hope that nothing happens, but it's not a perfect world. And if and when there is an incident, it really is a huge benefit to, you're not dealing with third parties who don't know anything about your business. You're dealing with your trusted MSP who, knows exactly where to go and how to get you back up and running as quickly as possible.
I think that goes back to the point that you're making about getting all your resources in place. And I have I mean, that's a big deal. So I want to talk a little bit about policy coverage limits. And I don't know if you could kind of give us an idea on what that would look like for a small to medium business.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I
I'm
will
good with
say,
loaded questions,
yeah.
Sinclair.
Most small to medium sized businesses I see typically start with like 1 to 3 million. But the right
Okay.
amount really depends on, a lot of different things. Of course, your revenue, what kind of data are you housing on your network and maintaining? And then also like, what's your downtime risk? So if you were, down for 3 weeks because of a ransomware incident, what would that look like for you in loss of revenue? And I think that's really where our insurability audit, which I know you've seen, Kim, it really does help because it gives you a really good sense of, what that exposure really looks like.
I do know about this, a little tongue in cheek, because we went through one literally yesterday with one of our clients, which I think I don't want to gloss over that because I know that you guys do that at no additional cost for our clients, at least. I was hoping, that you could talk a little bit more about that insurability audit because I just think that's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, I do too. I love it. We've been doing it for a little over a year when we launched the actual like tooling. And it's just been so powerful. Essentially, and if anyone here has ever filled out a cyber insurance application, they're pretty long and technical, but the insurability audit is not. It's a simple low lift assessment, maybe takes 5 to 10 minutes of time to complete. And it really gives businesses a clear picture of their actual cyber risk and their insurance readiness. So it uses real claims data and provides industry trends so that you can, pinpoint what are businesses like yours actually seeing in terms of incidents and what were the average losses in dollars, for businesses like yours. The report also compares your current cybersecurity controls, so your security environment, against insurability standards. So we can very quickly and easily see if there's any misalignment there that could impact your claim getting paid in the event of an incident. And then another really cool thing it does is if you do currently have coverage, it will actually provide you with a gap analysis on your policy specific to your unique exposure. So, where are we seeing any limiting language or exclusions? Are there low sublimits in high exposure areas for your business? And that way, you just kind of get a big picture outlook, and there are no surprises come claim time.
Well, you said low lift, and I did actually go and look, and it's about 30, it's less than 30 questions. And half of those are business related questions, and half of them are security questions. But it's not like some of them I've seen where you have to write 20 paragraphs. I feel like I'm back in college again, but it's just it's present, it's not present, it's partially present. So I think that's really easy. It's a very easy lift. And then providing a copy of your current insurance policy, I know, is part of that audit as well. So you can do that gap analysis. And that, I guess that's if an insurance policy, a cybersecurity insurance policy actually exists. And we've been working with some of our clients that are surprised, that they didn't know that they didn't have one. They didn't know that they needed one. That goes back to something that you were saying earlier about it's really not your business insurance.
Yeah, yeah, I know. And it's actually even not as rare as you'd think that businesses are really surprised by what we find in their coverage, like as far as certain exclusions, like one we found last week was an operating system exclusion. So if your operating system goes down because of an incident, your first party coverage is slashed in half. Insurance has long been, I think, known for its ambiguity. And so at Seedpod, we really try to take that out so you can understand what's covered, what are you paying for?
Well, and having a resource that can explain it to you, that was, I think, one of the other things that's really valuable there, but definitely not the kind of surprise that you want when you find out when you have an incident that your coverage just isn't covering what you need it to. So this might be a good segue for me. Everyone I interview, and I told you I was going to ask you for this, and I'm not sure if you can or not, but I always love those real world examples. I know you touched on that just a little bit, but do you maybe have something that gives us a broader understanding of the financial impact on a business?
Yes, I do. And I know we had talked about this previously. So unfortunately, I do have a real world example, probably more than one, honestly. But The first one that comes to mind is a more recent one over the past month, I'd say, and that was involving a manufacturing company. They were hit with a ransomware attack, which, the point of entry there was an employee actually unknowingly clicking a malicious link in an email. So just referencing that security awareness training again. But yeah, the attackers pretty much encrypted their production systems and forced the company to shut down. Right? They couldn't operate, they couldn't generate revenue for I think 2 weeks, give or take. And for them, that represented about a $500,000 loss in income. And then, of course, in addition to that, they incurred around 250,000 in costs for all of the other things that come into play when you're trying to respond to an incident. So, forensics investigators, system restoration, so they could get back up and running, and then the incident response specialists to like safely recover their environment. So, $750,000 of loss, and unfortunately, they were in that bucket of they assumed that their general liability policy would at least cover a portion of that loss. Unfortunately, that was not the case. So they did unfortunately have to absorb the full financial impact themselves. But certainly, a standalone cyber policy would have covered all of that after satisfying the deductible. So, and usually those are like, 5 grand to 7,500. So significantly lower than the $750,000 out of pocket.
Yeah, that's really what I was trying to get at. Thank you for that. But wow, $750,000. That's a tough year for an owner. I hope they're still in business. I wish them the best of luck. But I think it touches on what you were discussing earlier about really making sure that you understand what's covered and what's not. So really making sure you have the sufficient coverage for what one of those breaches could look like. When we were talking a little bit earlier, and you said that's not an uncommon number to see.
No, no, it's definitely not. And the limits of coverage, I feel like they always come up during insurance conversations, because it's hard to kind of gauge what is enough. When you think about insurance, you tend to want to think in catastrophe, right? Like the worst possible case scenario. That's what you want to make sure you have insurance to cover. But for businesses that have never seen an incident firsthand, it's kind of hard to gauge what that looks like. Um, some of the items that I'll typically bring up just to kind of provoke thought around that, and gauge where they should be. Um, Downtime, obviously, like we talked about with that manufacturing example. If you were down for 2 to 3 weeks because of a ransomware incident, what would that mean for you in loss of revenue? Also, if you had to restore all of your systems, what would that cost be? As well as having forensics come out and investigate, which again can get pretty costly. And you can actually, depending on who the vendor is, probably get pricing indications on that. And then also a really important part is notification and response costs. Um, those costs can get very expensive. It's mostly driven by the type and the number of records involved. And so when we talk about records, I'm referring to like, personally identifiable information, so PII, or financial data, or PHI, so healthcare data. So any kind of sensitive client information, the more sensitive or regulated that data is, the higher the regulatory requirements are going to be, and therefore, the response costs typically become.
Yeah, that's that we deal with a lot of compliance aspects for our business, and so that is the difficult part. Is that how do we make sure that we're not only going in there for notifications, but making sure that we're doing it in a compliant way. So, no, thank you for highlighting that, Sinclair. I time has just flown by. It's been so good getting together with you. And I wanted to have some time for our audience to pop some questions in. I know that we have public and private chat forms, platforms. So let me take a look and see if I've got any questions in here. Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
I do have a question for you. Sinclair, does cyber insurance cover wire fraud?
It does. Yep. That would fall under your crime coverage. So definitely something important to look for in a policy. And usually that would be either under funds transfer fraud. So if we're talking about a situation where, a threat actor has stolen your banking credentials and is now issuing wire transfers directly with your bank on your behalf, that's funds transfer fraud. And then another common one is that social engineering. So, that would be if an employee of yours is actually tricked into sending funds to a fraudulent account. But crime coverage would definitely cover both of those incidents.
All right, I've got another one here as well, and I've got a few in waiting for you. This is how quickly do I have to report an incident?
That's a great question because we did touch on reporting. Yeah, so reporting requirements, they do vary. So by carrier and policy, you might see some differences there. I would say generally speaking, you know, notifying the carrier as soon as you've noticed that an incident is occurring is the safest bet. But if you did want to check your policy, usually that time frame, if there is a specific one noted, usually that would be outlined in like the notice of claim or notice of circumstance section, or somewhere within the policy conditions.
All right, I've got another one here. Um, am I able to get coverage if I've had a prior breach?
Yes, yes. Having a breach does impact pricing. So typically, what carriers will ask on really any application is going to be, what's your loss history? Sometimes it's 3 years, sometimes it's 5 years. So have you had any claims, breaches, incidents in the last 3 to 5 years? You can definitely still get insurance. And sometimes it's even more affordable than you might think, given a previous experience. The carrier is just going to want to know, A, what happened? How did the threat actor get access to your network? What transpired? What was the loss that you incurred? And then, more importantly, what have you done since that incident to enhance your security and prevent a similar type of incident from occurring again?
Yeah, we've seen that where they've increased all their security posture, and it's driven their cost down, so it's lower, even though they've had an incident.
Yep.
All right, and this is one, this might be a little bit redundant to what we've already been talking about quite a bit, but somebody might have missed this, and it's just the question is, how do I know if I'm overpaying now?
Yep. Um, well, we can definitely look at it for you. We're happy to connect. But really, overpaying is not just about premium. So it's looking at your coverage and the response services and the policy terms, and figuring out if they actually match your risk. So two policies can have, they can cost the same and almost look the same, but can perform very differently in a real life incident. Um, that's really why working with a cyber focused specialist like Seedpod Cyber, we specialize in cyber insurance. And we have the tools where we can really benchmark pricing and coverage across carriers, and really just make sure that you're getting real value, not necessarily just a lower price.
Agreed. Bad news, though, Sinclair. It's about all we have time for. But you did mention, I mentioned early on, you mentioned that you were going to give a gift to everyone. So, can you tell everyone a little bit about the CEO checklist?
I can, yeah. So we'll be sending that out. The CEO Cyber Insurability Checklist is really more of an executive level thought exercise. So it's designed to help leadership evaluate their organization's risk, response readiness, and really overall preparedness. You might even, identify some potential gaps along the way that could impact your insurability, your financial exposure, and certainly claims outcomes.
That sounds so helpful, Sinclair. I'm going to make sure that goes out along with the recording from today's session. I do want to give you the final thought when it comes to cybersecurity insurance before I close things out.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Kim. Final thoughts. Well, I guess this will go right in line with kind of what we've been, talking about today, but really cyber insurance is not just about having a policy. It's about being insurable. So, The businesses that combine both strong cybersecurity with the right coverage are going to be the ones that stay resilient against what is a very evolving, threat landscape.
I think well said. Thank you, Sinclair. And I really appreciate you taking the time today to share your knowledge with everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Kim.
I would like to also thank everyone who joined us on the call today. I hope you found this webinar informational. I know we're in the planning stages for our next webinar series, which is going to be around artificial intelligence and really probably more on how to make it actionable. So do follow us on LinkedIn for more details as those are developing and our marketing team is working through those. As a reminder, we're going to be sending out the replay link for today's session, along with that CEO checklist that Sinclair just mentioned. But Sinclair and I would love to continue the conversation with you. If you have additional questions or if you'd like to walk through that free insurability audit, please go to our website and just click on the Start a Conversation with Our Team button. We're happy to reach out to you and work with you on whatever you need. On behalf of IP Consulting and Sinclair with Seedpod Cyber, thank you for your commitment to protecting your business, your clients, and your future. Have a great rest of your day.